Good evening all, and welcome back to Paranoia Files. Tonight, the Alaskan wilderness is more than a backdrop. It is a living accomplice to some of the most disturbing small-town horror stories ever unearthed. In this episode, we journey into frozen communities where neighbors vanish without footprints, where coastal lights move against the wind, where backroad sirens seem to call specific names, and where a simple ferry ride or census visit can erase a person more completely than the snow itself. These 8 narratives are drawn from a mosaic of incident reports, local whispers, and first-hand confessions gathered from people who still refuse to speak on record, but could not keep their secrets any longer. Each account has been reconstructed from overlapping testimonies, late-night emails, and fragments of official paperwork, with certain names and identifying details altered to protect those who still live in these towns and those who never truly left them. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Paranoia Files for daily true crime and horror content designed to stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Hit that notification bell so you never miss the moment when the next story steps out of the snow and into the light. I still drive that same frozen stretch of highway outside town, even when there is no reason to be out there, just to make sure those lights are not waiting for me again. My name is Theo, and I grew up in a place most maps do not bother to label properly. A fishing town on the south coast of Alaska, wedged between the mountains and a narrow inlet that freezes in bands like broken glass every winter. In the summer, we triple in size with tourists and seasonal workers. In the winter, it feels like the world ends at the last streetlight, and the rest of the planet has quietly moved on without us. Out here, people do not ask why you are driving the coastal road after midnight. They just assume you have your reasons, and that you are willing to live with whatever you find. 3 people went missing on that road 2 winters ago, all in the space of a single month. The official story says they probably went through the ice, that they misjudged a drift or slid toward the inlet and never came back up. It happens sometimes. The current under the pan ice is strong enough to take a truck down the channel, out to deeper water, leaving nothing but a torn hole rimmed with frozen slush. That is what the state police wrote anyway. Those of us who were actually there that last night know that nothing ever broke. The ice never gave way. The lights took them. I was working nights for the DOT then, part of a skeleton crew whose job was to keep that 1 2-lane road borderline passable between our town and the cannery 15 miles down the coast. The cannery runs year-round and the trucks have to get through. We had 1 plow, 1 sand truck, and 4 guys to rotate shifts. I pulled the graveyard because I did not have kids or anyone waiting up for me. It suited me fine. You get used to the rhythm of it, the way snow squeals under the tires at 20 below, the way the radio chatter goes quiet after midnight except for the occasional fisherman coming in too late, his voice drifting through the static like he is calling from another century. There is a spot on that road, mile marker 19, where the inlet comes closer than anywhere else. On your right is a sheer rock wall crusted with ice and mostly dead trees leaning at angles that make you uncomfortable if you stare too long. On your left, the land drops away to the frozen water. No guardrail, just snow berms and darkness. The locals have an unwritten rule. You do not stop there after midnight. If you blow a tire, you limp it another quarter mile even if you are shredding rubber. If your engine dies, you call in, lock the doors, and sit tight until someone reaches you. You do not get out. You do not go down toward the ice. If you ask why, people give you the same shrug and the same joke about the bad spot and how your phone never has signal there. Then they change the subject. I never thought much of it until the night I broke the rule. It was late January, the kind of cold that makes the air feel solid in your lungs. I had already done 1 pass out to the cannery and back, plow blade throwing up curtains of powder that sparkled in my headlights. The sky was clear, but there was a weird haze over the inlet, a faint green sheen that did not look like the usual aurora. It hugged the horizon, low and slow, almost level with the road. I remember thinking it looked like someone had smeared glow-in-the-dark paint along the ice. Around 1 in the morning, the radio crackled. It was Lewis, the cannery night guard, calling over the old CB we still use between town and the plant. "Road guy, you got your ears on?" I picked up the mic. "Go ahead." "You see those damn lights out there?" he asked. "Been watching them for a half hour. They are not moving, right?" I glanced toward the inlet. The haze had thickened, rising in looping curtains that bent against the direction of the wind. It should have been blowing inland off the water, but the glowing bands were leaning toward the sea instead, like they were anchored there. "Probably just a good show tonight," I said. "Keeps you from falling asleep." He did not laugh. "No, man. They are too low. And the dogs will not go outside. They are hiding under my desk. The cannery keeps 2 big huskies for patrol. If those animals were scared, I figured I should at least pay attention." "Stay inside," I told him. "I am coming back your way for another pass. I will call it in if I see anything." The radio clicked twice in acknowledgement. That was the last time I heard Lewis's voice. The first sign that something was off came about a mile before the bad spot. My headlights picked up glitter on the road, not from ice or sand, but from something hanging in the air. Tiny particles that flashed and vanished as if I was driving through suspended dust. The plow's engine noise seemed to dampen like I was underwater, and the usual rattle of the cab went strangely distant. I flicked my high beams off and on, thinking maybe the bulbs were going. But the darkness around the truck just swallowed the light and gave nothing back. There was a car ahead, half buried in a snow berm on the inlet side. Hazard lights blinking orange in the blue-white world. I swore under my breath. I was almost at mile 19. "Come on," I muttered. "Not here." Protocol said I should stop. The rule said I should not. I told myself the rule was just superstition, something to make kids behave and keep tourists from doing dumb things on black ice. Those hazards were getting dimmer. If I drove past and it really was someone stuck, I would have to live with whatever happened to them next. I pulled in behind the car, killed the plow blade, and set the brake. The engine idled low, dull in my ears. It felt like someone had thrown a blanket over the entire truck. My phone screen stayed stubbornly at no service. The car was a silver sedan, plates from in-state, rear bumper dusted with salt and ice. All 4 doors were closed. The exhaust pipe spat a faint vapor. The engine was running. I grabbed my heavy coat, stepped out into the cold, and immediately noticed that the sound of the engine did not get any louder. It stayed the same distant hum, like I was hearing it through a wall. "Hey," I called, walking toward the driver's side. "You all right in there? Rough spot to park." As I spoke, I realized I could not hear my own voice properly either. The words came out thin and swallowed, like the air itself was sick of noise. The driver's window rolled down. A woman in her 30s stared back at me, cheeks flushed from the heater, hands clenched around the steering wheel. Her eyes looked wrong. Not glazed, not high, just fixed, like she was listening to something far away that I could not hear. "You should not be out of your truck," she said. Her voice sounded normal, but it came from too far away, like the world had moved her a few feet to the left without shifting the car. "You are the one in the snowbank," I said, forcing a smile. "You need a tow, or can you back it out if I clear the berm?" She blinked slowly, then looked past me toward the inlet. "They are early tonight," she murmured. I followed her gaze. The haze that had been hugging the horizon was gone. In its place, hanging over the ice maybe 50 yards from the shore, was a dome of pale green light about the size of a small house. It did not have a clear edge. It bled into the night, pulsing gently like something breathing. The surface of the ice beneath it was perfectly smooth, no cracks, no snowdrifts, just a dark, glossy mirror. I should have felt the wind on my face. There is always wind there, even on calm nights, funneling between the cliffs and the water. Instead, the air lay on my skin like cold glass. I could hear my own breathing, but when I exhaled, there was no sound of it leaving me. The woman's door opened. I had not heard the latch or the hinges. She stepped out in boots and a parka that was not nearly heavy enough for the temperature, leaving the engine running, hazard lights still ticking away. She did not look at me again. Her eyes never left that soft, breathing glow. "Hey," I said, reaching for her arm. My gloved hand closed on her sleeve. Her body felt light, insubstantial, like there was less of her than there should have been. "Ma'am, you should stay in the car. This ice can go bad quick." She smiled faintly, like she had just remembered a joke from childhood. "They are calling in more," she said. "They did not think anyone would be here yet." Before I could ask what she meant, movement flickered at the tree line on the far side of the road. I turned. 3 figures were walking out from between the spruce trunks, stepping carefully down the slope toward the inlet. No coats, no hats, just regular clothes, like they were crossing a parking lot in town. Their faces were turned toward the light, features slack and peaceful. I recognized 2 of them immediately. The first was an older man named Crawford who ran the hardware store. He had not been in town for a week. People said he had gone to Anchorage for a medical appointment, but his truck was still parked behind his shop. The second was a teenage boy who bagged groceries at the store. I had seen his missing poster taped up near the register 3 days ago. The third was a woman I had never met, but there was something familiar in the way she held her shoulders, the tilt of her head. It tugged at me, a half-remembered face from a dream. They walked right past me and the woman from the car, feet crunching in the shallow snow at the edge of the road. I could not hear their footsteps. The dome of light brightened as they approached it, casting a soft glow over their skin that erased shadows. When they reached the edge of the inlet, they did not stop. They stepped out onto the ice. The ice did not crack. It did not even creak. They walked across that mirror-smooth surface as if it were concrete, clothing untouched by the wind that should have been there. When they reached the center of the glow, their outlines blurred as if someone had smeared their bodies with a thumb on a photograph. For a second, their faces seemed to turn toward me, all 3 at once, eyes catching a reflection that was not from my headlights. Then they were gone. There was no splash, no fall, no sign that anything solid had ever stood there. Behind me, the plow's engine stuttered. The hazard lights on the sedan flickered out. The dome of light pulsed twice more, like a heartbeat slowing, then folded in on itself and vanished. The darkness rushed back so fast my eyes hurt. Sound came with it in a violent crash. The wind roared down from the cliffs, slamming into me hard enough to stagger. The engine noise, my own gasp, the metallic clink of the plow blade against its mount, all came roaring back at once. I spun toward the road. The sedan was empty. The driver's door hung open, snow already drifting onto the seat. There were footprints in the fresh powder leading around the front of the car and down the slope toward the inlet. They stopped at the edge where the snow turned to ice. There were no prints on the ice itself. The plow's radio burst into life. Somebody from town calling my unit number, asking if I had lost power. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pick up the mic. By the time I got a signal on my phone and called it in, the story had already started to warp. The trooper who came out the next day saw only a car half buried in snow. No sign of struggle, no obvious tracks left in the wind-scoured drifts. The official narrative became simple. Driver, likely disoriented, walked out onto the inlet in low visibility, went through thin ice. As for the 3 people I saw walking from the trees, their cases slid into that same file. possible victims of unstable ice, possible hypothermia, possible anything except what actually happened. People started saying I had been awake too long, that night shifts and whiteouts will mess with your head. They nodded along when I told the story, then added little flourishes when they repeated it at the bar. The light became regular aurora, the figures became shadows, the missing people turned into faces he thought he recognized. The more I tried to insist on the details, the more politely people listened, and then decided to remember it their own way. I would have started doubting myself too if not for the photos. I did not forget that part. When the woman from the car first stepped out before the figures appeared, I had reached for my phone without really thinking about it. Habit. You see something weird on the road, you document it, you cover your ass. I did not remember actually hitting the shutter, but when I sat in my kitchen later that day, hands still shaking, the gallery was full of images from the inlet. Most of them were useless, just washed out swirls of pale green and white, the camera fighting the low light. But in 3 of them, taken in sequence, you can make out shapes on the ice. The silhouettes of 3 people blurred at the edges, walking toward a glow that the lens renders as a blown-out stain across the frame. In the last one, they are closer to the center. The figures are stretched, pulled, like their bodies are leaning away from their own legs. The state police did not want the photos. The trooper shrugged when I offered, said it was too dark to be useful and that digital images are easy to manipulate anyway. The others in town saw them at first, in the early days when everyone still wanted to talk about it. Then, as the weeks went by and the holes in the official story widened, interest cooled. People have a limited appetite for the inexplicable. After that, the photos only existed on my phone and in my nightmares. I kept driving the road. It was still my job, and the snow does not care if you are afraid. For a long time, nothing happened. No strange haze on the horizon, no muffled air, no dome of light. The missing stayed missing. Their names came up in conversation less and less. New posters went up in the store, new weather rolled in. Life such as it is out here went on. Then late this fall, the texts started. The first one came at 12:17 a.m. I was off shift, sitting in my living room, the TV on low, the wind rattling the single-pane windows. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. No message, just an image attachment. I opened it without thinking. It was a photo of the coastal road taken from somewhere above and behind my truck. You could see my plow's taillights, twin red smears in the dark, and beyond them the faint arc of the inlet, traced in pale green. The timestamp on the photo was from 10 minutes earlier. Nobody else was scheduled to be out there. I told myself some idiot with a drone was messing around. I deleted it. The next night, another image came. This time, the photo was closer, as if whoever was taking them had stepped nearer to the truck. You could almost make out the back of my head through the rear window. I changed my number. I left the phone in a drawer for 3 days. When I finally turned it back on, there were 6 more images waiting, all of them taken from positions where there should not have been anyone standing. From the middle of the inlet, from just beyond the reach of the plow's headlights, from the air directly above mile marker 19. In the last one, the most recent, there are no vehicles at all. The road is empty, the snow unmarked. In the center of the frame, hanging over the frozen water, is that same pale dome of light, slightly smaller than I remember, as if it is still forming. At the very bottom of the image, just visible when you zoom in, there is a smudge that might be my reflection in the truck window. My face is turned toward the glass. My mouth is open like I am saying something I cannot hear. I do not show these to anyone. I know what they will say. They will talk about long exposures, about light pollution, about someone playing a cruel joke. They will say it is stress. They will tell me to take some time off. They will bring up the 3 missing people and remind me gently that it is easier to believe in bad ice than in hungry lights. I drive that road anyway. I tell myself it is to do my job, to keep the trucks moving and the town supplied. In the quiet part of my mind, the part that still sees those 3 figures walking across the unbroken ice, I know the truth. I am checking. I am waiting. I am making sure the lights, whatever they are, have not found someone else yet. Because they did not chase me that night. They did not pull me toward the inlet or whisper my name the way they did to the others. They just watched. They let me walk away, shivering and half-deaf, clutching my radio like a talisman. That feels less like mercy every day and more like patience. Out here, the road is the only thing that connects us to the rest of the world. If something out there has learned to move against the wind, to step across ice without breaking it, to wear familiar faces like winter coats, then the road is not a safety line anymore. It is a trail, a path they can follow inland 1 mile at a time. If the lights come back in full, if that dome blooms over the inlet again, I think they will be ready for me this time. I think they have been practicing with pictures and signal drops and muffled air. And when they finally decide they have called in enough, they will not need to make me walk to them. They will simply turn my headlights toward the water and make sure I do not stop until the road runs out. My name is Hannah, and I am no longer a practicing therapist, at least not in any way a licensing board would recognize. There is a file locked in a metal cabinet in a clinic 2 flights up from a grocery store in a tiny Alaskan town. On the tab in my old careful handwriting, there is a single name. The problem is that I am no longer certain whether that name belongs to a former patient or to me. When I first moved north, I thought it would be temporary. A rural placement, pay off my loans, get my required hours, then head back to the city where the worst thing my clients worried about was traffic and office politics. The town's population sign said 923, though most locals said it was closer to 800 if you counted the ones who spent winters in Anchorage. 1 medical clinic, 1 nurse practitioner, a rotating doctor every few weeks, and me, the only mental health provider for 100 miles. There is a certain rhythm to small-town therapy. You recognize everyone's last name. Your clients are also the person who rings up your groceries, the dispatcher who answers when you call emergency services, the mother of the child who shovels your driveway. You hear their stories again later, distorted as gossip at the diner. You learn to carry secrets like spare change in your pockets, heavy but familiar. For the first few months, it was mostly depression, isolation, drinking that had gotten out of hand during long winters. A few trauma cases from accidents on the highway or incidents out on the ice. Nothing my training had not prepared me for. I kept neat notes, sent my billing codes through the clinic manager, did my own laundry in the shared machines at my apartment above the post office. I started to think I could get used to the way the wind sounded in the vents at night, like someone standing in the hallway breathing. Then he arrived on a Tuesday in late January, 10 minutes before closing. He did not sign in at the front desk. When I opened the door from my office to walk my last client out, he was already sitting in the waiting room chair closest to my door, hands folded on a battered manila folder. No appointment. No referral. He looked to be in his early 40s, hair grown out just enough to suggest he had not been paying much attention to himself lately. His coat was wrong for the weather, thin, city brand, more decorative than functional. "I think I am your last one," he said, as if continuing a conversation we had started earlier. I glanced toward the receptionist's window. It was dark. She had gone home 10 minutes before. "I do not have you on my schedule," I said. "This clinic usually—" "You wrote me in by hand," he interrupted. "Check your planner." The strangest part was that I did not feel threatened. Annoyed, yes, intrigued maybe, but not unsafe. My paper planner lay open on the reception desk where I had left it while seeing my previous client. I picked it up, already composing, the boundary speech in my head. No walk-ins, no late additions, please call ahead next time. On the 4 p.m. slot in my own looping script, there was a name I did not recognize. Underneath, in smaller letters, the phrase, initial eval, referred by self. I frowned. Did you speak with anyone earlier this week? I asked. Sometimes You squeezed me in when you got the cancellation, he said gently. You said you hate to see open time on the page. I do say that. I say it often, but I did not remember saying it to him. Against my better judgment, I gestured toward my office. We can do a brief intake today, I said. Full session next week, all right? He smiled like a student who had finally gotten the right answer. That is how we did it last time, too. In supervision, we are taught to trust, but verify. To let strangeness register, but not to let it run the room. I told myself there could be a simple explanation. A phone call I had forgotten. A note I had scribbled absent-mindedly. People slip through official scheduling systems more often than administrators admit. He settled into the chair opposite my desk, set the folder on his lap, and waited while I opened a new chart on my computer. What brings you in today? I asked, launching into the familiar cadence. What made you decide now was the time to talk? He looked around my office in a slow, assessing sweep. His gaze lingered on the diplomas on the wall, the family photo on the bookshelf, the chipped mug my sister had painted for me years ago. When his eyes met mine again, there was something patient there. Not desperate, not agitated, patient, like a teacher waiting for a child to catch up. You said you wanted to address your reality testing, he said. You said you were starting to notice the seams. I felt a little spark of irritation. I am asking about you, I said, not about me. That is what you said last time too, he replied and opened the folder. Inside were copies of my intake forms. Not blank ones, completed ones. The name line was filled in. The same name on the chart tab in that locked cabinet upstairs. The handwriting was mine. Under presenting concerns, in the box where I always encouraged clients to write in their own words, there was a sentence so neat it could have been typeset. I am afraid this town is not real. I felt my scalp tighten. Where did you get those? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. You filled them out, he said, and tapped the date in the upper right-hand corner. It was 3 weeks earlier. You asked me to keep them for you until you were ready. I checked the clinic system. No appointment under that name 3 weeks ago. No billing codes, no note, no record in my supervisor's caseload review. My planner for that day showed a full schedule, no mention of an extra intake. You think you are thorough, he said, conversationally. You are most of the time, but you cannot track what happens in the gaps if you will not look at them. I should have ended the session. I should have asked him to leave, or at the very least gone to get someone from the medical side of the clinic. Instead, I heard myself say, "Tell me more about why you believe this town is not real." He settled back, satisfied, like we had finally gotten back onto the correct script. The next 45 minutes are a blur when I try to recall them directly. What I remember instead are pieces. His descriptions of the way snow fell in exactly the same pattern outside my window every Tuesday afternoon. How I could predict, down to the minute, when the freight truck would pass, even when they changed drivers. The fact that my radio, when turned to the local station, played the same 6 news items in loops, with no variation except the date. That is how small towns are, I said, even as a part of me cataloged how often I had thought the same thing. No, he said gently. That is how you were told small towns are. There is a difference. He told me about my own childhood. Not in generalities, but with specific details I had never used in any anecdote. The color of the wallpaper in my first bedroom. The name of the dog we had for only 6 months before it ran away. The way my father's car had smelled when he picked me up from the police station the night I was caught shoplifting at 15. Things I had told therapists years ago in another city, under another license. "You signed the consent to release," he reminded me when I stammered that he could not possibly know those things. "You wanted the continuity of care." There was no consent form in our system. There were no fax records. "You understand how easy it is to create the illusion of a life," he said. "You do it for your clients all the time. You help them build narratives they can stand to inhabit. You smooth the rough edges, explain away the inconsistencies. You tell them what to focus on and what to let go." He leaned forward, hands still folded, voice never rising. "Someone did that for you, they just did a less careful job." I remember the feel of the chair arms under my fingers, the grain of the worn wood digging into my palms. I remember looking down at my notes and realizing that I had written nothing. The page was blank except for the date and his name. My pen lay on the floor by my foot. "You dissociated," he said mildly. "You do that a lot in this room. They built that into you on purpose. Easier to maintain the frame if you are not fully present." That was the moment something inside me snarled awake. Anger is grounding. Training takes over. I stood up, heart pounding. "This is over," I said. "I am ending this session. I will ask the clinic to have you escorted out." He nodded as if we had just reached the expected end point. "You did that last time, too," he said. "It did not stick then either, but we can pretend if it helps." The next thing I remember clearly is sitting on my couch at home, hours later, my coat still on, snow melting into the rug. My phone showed a string of missed calls from the clinic manager, asking why I had not locked up, why my office light was still on. I checked my bag. The manila folder was inside, my alleged intake forms tucked neatly in place. In the morning, I told myself I had been tired, that I had become too emotionally involved too quickly. I put the folder in my bottom desk drawer, locked it, and decided I would bring it up at supervision as a boundary testing case. When I looked for the client's name in the appointment system for the following week, there it was, right where I had said we would put it. My own initials were next to it, in the scheduled by column. He did not show up for that appointment, or the one after that. When I tried to call the number listed on his face sheet, a robotic voice informed me it was not in service. I told the receptionist to flag him as a no-show. We moved on. New clients, new crises. Snow piled up outside, then melted. The daylight returned slowly. Months passed before I dared open the bottom drawer again. The folder was thicker. Inside, my neat intake forms had multiplied. Each one in my handwriting, each with a different date spaced out over 3 or 4 weeks. Under presenting concerns, the sentences shifted slightly, as if someone were testing variations on a theme. I am afraid this town is not real. I am afraid my memories are not mine. I am afraid there is someone else using my voice. At the very back of the folder, behind the clinical paperwork, there were pages torn from my own therapy notebook. Personal reflections I had written in another state, on another couch in another life. Here they were interleaved with progress notes in my professional shorthand, notes that described a female client in her early 30s working as a therapist in a remote town, struggling with episodes of derealization and intrusive thoughts that her clients were actors reading from a script. Client denies suicidal intent. Client expresses fear that disclosing full extent of symptoms will result in removal from the program. The handwriting was mine. The pronouns were not. I did not sleep that night. I photocopied everything and hid the copies under the lining of my suitcase. The originals went back into the folder, back into the drawer. The next morning, I walked upstairs to the medical floor, requested an unscheduled meeting with the supervising physician, and told him I was taking a leave of absence for health reasons. He looked at my face, at the tremor in my hands, and signed the paperwork without asking many questions. I moved south within a week to a town with proper traffic lights and more than one restaurant. I surrendered my license voluntarily 6 months later. On the form, I checked the box that said personal reasons. That should have been the end of it. Here is what happened instead. About a year after I left, I received an envelope from the Alaskan clinic. No cover letter, no billing statement. Just a single photocopied page, my old case list from my last month there, each client's name highlighted in yellow, all but one, his. At the bottom, in a different pen, someone had written, "Active Tanun, do not close, treating clinician H. Kerr." I called the clinic. The receptionist who answered was new. She said my name sounded familiar from some of the older files, but that the previous administrator had retired. When I asked about the highlighted list, she hesitated. "We still have you in the system," she admitted. "Not current staff, but attached, like you are still supervising one case." "Whose?" I asked, though I already knew. She read the name, the same as on the tab of the folder in the locked cabinet, the same as on all those intake forms. "He has not been in for a while," she added quickly like a reassurance. "The notes say he prefers late appointments. With you." I told her that was impossible, that I no longer lived there, that my license was inactive. There was a pause, the faint clack of keys. "Well," she said finally, "that is strange. The last few entries are this year. They have your initials." I hung up without saying goodbye. My heart was hammering so hard I could taste metal. That night I took out the photocopies I had made, smoothed them on my kitchen table, and read every line by the light of a single lamp. At the very bottom of the last progress note, in smaller handwriting than the rest, almost hesitant, there was a sentence I had never noticed before. "Client agrees to continue sessions in altered setting if original construct is retired." The date was from the week I moved away. These days, people ask why I do not go back into practice. They talk about shortages, about how my skills are needed. They do not understand that I cannot sit across from another person in a small room with a closed door and trust that our roles are what they appear to be. The rational part of my mind can list possibilities. Records errors, identity theft, a malicious prank orchestrated by someone with access to my files. The world of mental health is not immune to human pettiness or cruelty. But there is another part of me, the part that still wakes up at 3 a.m., certain that someone is sitting at the foot of my bed waiting to resume a conversation we never finished, that wonders if leaving the town did not end the experiment. It simply moved it. Every few months, another envelope arrives, no return address. Inside, a copy of a single progress note. Each one written in my style, but with slight deviations, like someone improving an impression. The most recent one was brief. Client presents with ongoing fear that therapy space is artificial. Clinician reassures client that all elements are authentic and necessary for treatment. Client asks who is writing this. Clinician chooses not to answer at this time. The initials at the bottom were mine. The signature was not. I tell myself that if I ignore it long enough, the file will finally be closed, somewhere in a cabinet in a building on a street I can no longer picture clearly. But on the worst nights, when the walls of my apartment seem too clean, too bare, too new, I catch myself checking the corners of the room for cameras I cannot see, microphones I cannot hear. I listen to my own voice and wonder how long I have been reading from someone else's notes. The hardest part to admit is this: I miss him, not as a person but as a fixed point, as evidence that there is something outside my own head. Because if he was never there, if I invented him entirely, then I am capable of forging entire realities with nothing more than belief and fear. And if he was real, if he really sat in that chair in my small office in that small town and told me my life was a construct, then someone built the parameters of that construct, including the day I would finally be ready to hear it. Either way, a therapist somewhere is still writing progress notes in my name, and I am no longer certain which side of the clipboard I belong on. My name is Ruben, and I used to think the worst thing that could happen on an ice road was falling through. I have driven trucks across frozen water most winters of my adult life. Out here in Alaska, the ice roads are veins that keep scattered villages alive when the rivers and inlets lock up and the snow turns the land into something you can barely recognize from a map. We haul fuel, food, medical supplies, whatever will not wait for spring. You learn, early on, to respect the ice. You learn the sounds it makes when it is healthy and when it is about to kill you. No one ever mentioned what it sounds like when there is something under it that is not water. The night that changed everything was my third run of the season between our hub town and a village upriver. I had an 18,000-gallon tanker hooked behind my cab, diesel sloshing slow and heavy inside, each sway a reminder that one wrong move could turn both of us into an anchor. The air temperature was close to -20, the kind of cold that makes the snow line on your beard turn to tiny needles when you breathe. There are checkpoints along the road where the maintenance crews drill and measure ice thickness, mark pressure ridges, flag new cracks. We get the reports before each run. This stretch is safe at this weight. This mile is one way only. This part we do not use at all. That night, everything checked out. The ice at the thinnest point was still twice what we needed. About 10 miles from the village, the radio crackled and died. It was not a fade the way it does when you slip behind a hill. 1 second, the maintenance channel was full of static and occasional chatter. The next, it went dead like someone had cut the wire. The light on the panel still glowed green. The needle moved when I turned the dial. It just had nothing to say back. "Fine," I muttered, more to myself than anything. We have done quiet before. The world outside my windshield was a tunnel of white and black. The headlights carved a path across the flat, packed surface of the road, their beams swallowed at the edges by darkness and low, ground-hugging mist. The ice to either side rose in jagged ridges, frozen waves locked mid-crash along the shoulders where the road plows had carved a path earlier in the season. Maybe a mile after the radio died, the sound changed. Truckers notice sound changes the way fishermen notice currents. You get used to the particular hum of your engine, the whine of your transmission, the hiss of the heater. When something shifts, your body feels it before your conscious brain can name it. This was not a noise from the truck, it was the absence of one from the road. Normally, driving on ice feels like rolling over a very hard drum. You feel micro-vibrations through the steering wheel and seat. Little feedback cues that tell you the surface is solid, that the thickness below is distributing your weight. As I rolled across that stretch, those vibrations faded until the sensation under my wheels was nothing. It was like driving over empty air. I eased off the throttle. The speedometer needle slipped back. The steering wheel suddenly felt too light in my hands. The tanker behind me stopped its slow, reassuring sway and became very still, like it was hovering. I knew from the thickness charts that this section should have been some of the safest ice on the route. The measurements did not care how it felt to my nerves. Then I heard it. A muffled noise from below, faint but distinct, like someone screaming through a wall. I told myself it was the ice shifting. That is what it sounded like if you did not think about it too hard. The long, drawn-out sink of air moving through cracks, the groan of plates adjusting to a temperature drop. But I had been out there long enough to know the difference between stress and distress. This was not the ice talking to itself. I drove on. What else was I supposed to do? Out there with a full tanker, stopping in the wrong place is as dangerous as moving. The charts, the gauges, the thickness logs, they all said the same thing. Keep going. So I did. The next day when I was back at the yard, I mentioned it to one of the maintenance guys over coffee. He frowned, then pulled out his tablet and scrolled through the latest sonar readings. Weird, he said finally. We did get some anomalies there, hollow pockets, but they did not line up with any known currents. Thought it was a glitch. We recalibrated and everything. Hollows? I repeated. Little gaps under the ice, he said. Air, usually nothing to worry about if the top layer is thick enough. But they seemed to move between readings. How do hollows move? I asked. He did not have an answer for that. The first time someone went missing for real was a week later. It was another driver from our outfit named Callum. Younger than me, but experienced enough that nobody double-checked his prep work. He headed out before dawn, same route, same load. He never made it to the village. Search and rescue found the track of his truck heading upriver, clear as you please. Then a section where the road showed stress lines in a tight pattern like a spider web pressed into the surface. Beyond that, nothing. No skid marks, no hole in the ice, no debris. Just the road continuing on as if the truck had never been there. They told us quietly off the record that the sonar in that area showed an elongated cavity under the road, a void about the length of a semi and trailer, too smooth to be natural. They theorized that perhaps the truck had broken through into a pocket, been swept along, then lodged somewhere under thicker ice downstream. It happened, rarely. They would drag when the weather allowed. I thought about that hollow feeling under my wheels, that scream from below, and did not say anything. In the weeks that followed, those void readings became more common. The maintenance guys started flagging stretches as soft, even when the thickness was technically fine. The company rerouted what it could, but that road was essential. You cannot tell a village of 300 people that their fuel and food will wait until nature sorts itself out. I kept driving. The radio kept cutting out at random spots, especially near where they had logged the hollows. Every time it did, the vibrations under the tires would fade and the silence under the engine noise would deepen. And every so often I would hear that noise from below, muffled, insistent, like someone calling through a thick door. You get superstitions quick in a line of work where a bad feeling can be the only warning you get. Some guys turned up the music when the radio died. Some muttered prayers. I did something I never mentioned to anyone. I started talking back. If you can hear me, I would say, half joking, half not, eyes fixed on the road, knuckles white on the wheel. You are under the wrong truck. It felt insane. It also felt less insane than pretending nothing was happening. The incident that ended my ice road career began as a favor. A last run before a storm front came in, just a partial load of fuel that needed to be topped off at a remote airstrip's tanks. Shorter route, familiar stretch. I told my dispatcher I would take it, then headed out as the first strands of cloud crept over a sky the color of bruised steel. About halfway there, near the same bend where the sonar logs like to draw hollow pockets, the world narrowed. The snowbanks on either side seemed to rise, my headlights tunneling between them. The radio died mid-sentence from the yard. My dashboard lights dimmed, then returned, though the engine never faltered. I knew what was coming. My hands went slick on the wheel. The vibrations under the tires faded until there was nothing but the dull spin of rubber on something that did not feel entirely solid. The air in the cab thickened, the heater fan's whine muffled, like I was sitting inside a shell, Then, clear as my own name, I heard it, a voice from beneath the ice screaming. It was not words, not anything I could translate. Just a raw, sustained sound of panic and pain bubbling up through yards of ice and water and God knows what else. It vibrated through the cab, through the bones of the truck, through my body. For a second, I felt like the seat had dropped away and I was sitting directly on a membrane that stretched and flexed under unimaginable pressure. The wheel jerked in my hands, not a mechanical failure, not the way it does when you hit a ridge. This was a tug, sharp and sideways, pulling me toward the right, toward the unplowed expanse beyond the safety flags. I fought it. I leaned left, muscles burning, every instinct screaming that if the cab followed that pull, the tanker would swing and we would both be done. The truck's frame creaked. The right tires hit rutted ice and the whole rig shuddered. For a heartbeat, I thought we were going over. Not me, I gasped, without meaning to. Not me. You had your chance. The screaming from below surged, then cut off so abruptly I thought I had gone deaf. The wheel released. The truck lurched back into the ruts of the road. The vibrations under the tires returned, humming through the frame like a heartbeat finally syncing up again. I did not remember breathing until I saw the next checkpoint flag flick past in the headlights. My hands took a long time to unclench from the wheel. When the radio snapped back to life a minute later with the dispatcher's voice asking for a status update, I almost cried. At the airstrip, while the attendant hooked up the hoses with slow, practiced motions, I walked a little way from the truck and stood listening to the ice. Nothing. No crack, no groan, no echo of what I had heard. On the way back at the yard, I told the foreman I was done. He did not argue. Maybe he saw something in my face. Maybe Callum's missing truck and the odd sonar readings had made him more willing to let experienced drivers walk away without a fight. People always ask the same questions when I tell this story. Usually late at night when the drinks have been flowing and the wind outside is loud enough that they have to lean in to hear me. What do you think it was, they ask? A current? A gas pocket? Your imagination? The safe answers are easy. Ice shifts. Sound plays tricks. Stress makes you hear things that are not there. I could say all of that and sleep a little better. But I keep thinking about the way those hollows moved between readings. About how the smooth, unnatural void under Callum's last known location matched his rig almost exactly. About the tug on the wheel, deliberate and insistent, not like physics, but like intent. Here is what I really believe. The thing I will only say out loud when the room is small and the audience is smaller. Whatever lives under that road learned to recognize our shape. It learned the weight of a truck and tanker, the pattern of our passage, the way our engines sound through ice. It learned over years of winter crossings that if it waited in the right place, a warm, heavy thing full of metal and fuel would pass directly above it. And maybe after it took one, it liked the taste. I sometimes dream of ice from the underside. Not flat, not solid, but veined with tunnels and chambers, some natural, some bored by something patient and hungry. In those dreams, I see dark forms moving along them, pacing our routes, sliding through black water that feels thicker than any river has a right to be. When one of us passes overhead, they rise, press themselves against the underside, and listen. In the dream, the sound they hear from above is laughter on the radio, music from some old playlist, a driver singing to stay awake. And below, what I heard that night, screaming, was not a victim. It was something else's eagerness echoing in a voice my brain could not understand. I do not drive ice roads anymore. I moved inland, took work hauling on actual pavement, where the worst thing under my wheels is a pothole big enough to break an axle. But every winter when the rivers freeze and the photos start circulating again, trucks crossing white emptiness, proud posts about another season begun, I feel it in my chest, a hollow that used to be full. Something out there is still listening for us, still learning our timing, still waiting for the next chance to grab hold of the weight rolling overhead. The drivers who go missing will be written off as accidents, as bad luck, as evidence that the job is just dangerous. Their families will be told the ice gave way and the river took them. No one will say the alternative out loud, that sometimes the ice does not break. Sometimes something beneath it opens instead. My name is Ellie, and I used to think disclosure forms were just paperwork. I sell houses for a living, or I did before one particular property convinced me that you can move people in and out of walls without leaving a trace on any official record. The house was in a small Alaskan town wedged between a bay and a line of low mountains, the kind of place where everyone has keys to everyone else's snowblower, and you can hear the school's morning bell all the way to the harbor. On paper, the place was nothing special. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a basement, and a detached garage leaning a little too hard toward the spruce trees out back. Built in the 70s, updated intermittently, owned by a family that had defaulted on their loan after relocating down south. That was how the bank phrased it. They never said where south was, and no one in town ever produced a forwarding address. The first time I walked through it, the heat was still on. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Foreclosures are usually cold, literally and figuratively. Empty shelves, echoing rooms, the stale smell of old carpet and lost arguments. This house was warm, not just from the baseboards humming along, but with that lived-in temperature you only get from bodies in the rooms breathing. There were mugs in the sink, coffee stains still wet at the bottom. A pair of boots stood by the front door, lined up neatly with a child's snow pants hanging from a hook above them. In the living room, a blanket lay folded over the back of the couch, not thrown, not draped. Folded. The TV remote sat in the center of the coffee table, facing the couch like it was waiting to be picked up. I walked through with my clipboard, dutifully checking off items for the bank. Intact appliances, no visible mold, no structural damage. Out of habit, I called out, "Hello?" before I went up the stairs, even though I knew the property was supposed to be vacant. No one answered, but the bathroom light was on, and there was a faint ring of moisture in the tub. I told myself the asset manager must have sent someone out ahead of me to winterize the place, someone who forgot to turn a few switches off. I shut lights, turned the thermostat down, and took my photos. The camera caught nothing unusual. Bland walls, worn carpet, whatever furniture the previous owners had not bothered to take with them. By the time I locked up, the house looked as empty as the paperwork said it was. A week later, the bank pushed it onto the fast track. "High priority," the email said. "Get it listed. We have interested parties." That was odd too. Most foreclosures languish for months, especially in tiny towns where the buyers can be counted on 2 hands. Still, a listing is a listing. I wrote up the description, leaned hard on cozy and family home, and tucked the unease into the same mental drawer where I keep thoughts about interest rates and mold. The first buyers were a couple from Fairbanks with a toddler and vague plans of simplifying. They paid cash, signed every document in blue ink like they were supposed to, and drove away from closing with a trunk full of groceries and new locks they had picked from the hardware store. I watched them go with that quiet satisfaction you get from finishing a clean sale. 3 months later, I got the email, "Property reverting to bank, buyer unreachable, proceed with reevaluation." I drove out expecting to find a mess. People who bail that fast usually do not bother cleaning up after themselves. What I found instead made me stand on the front porch for a full minute before I could convince my hand to turn the knob. The heat was on. A half-empty cereal bowl sat on the kitchen table, spoon still in it, the milk just beginning to clot. A kid's drawing was taped to the fridge, fresh lines of marker not yet faded by time. Upstairs, 2 of the 3 bedrooms had clothes in the closets, toothbrushes by the sinks, books beside the beds. The 3rd bedroom, the smallest, was empty except for a twin mattress leaning against the wall and a single duffel bag on the floor, half-zipped. I backed down the hall, heart pounding, calling out again, louder this time. No one answered. There were no cars in the driveway, no footprints leading away from the house. The neighbors, when I knocked on their doors later, swore they had not seen the family leave. They had seen them arrive, unloading boxes, waving awkwardly across the fence. They had heard a child laughing in the yard once or twice. Then nothing. "Maybe they left at night," one said. "People do strange things." The bank did not care about the cereal or the clothes. They cared about square footage and unpaid notes. I documented everything, sent it in, and waited for a response. The asset manager replied with a single line, "Clear personal items, relist immediately." So I did something I am still ashamed of. I hired a cleaning crew to pack the life they had left behind into boxes. We stacked those boxes in the basement, labeling them with dates. The house, once emptied of its obvious ghosts, returned to neutral. White walls, beige carpet, another listing in a market full of houses that had outlived the people who paid for them. The second buyers came that fall. Older this time, retired, looking for somewhere quiet to spend whatever years they had left. They spent an hour in the house, walking slower than the first couple, touching the banister, the kitchen cabinets, the glass of the back door. The woman paused at the basement door, hand on the knob, and shivered. "It feels like someone is watching from down there," she said with a laugh that did not reach her eyes. Her husband squeezed her shoulder. "That is what you get in old houses," he said. "Memories." They moved in before the first snow stuck. They even sent me a thank you card with a photo of themselves on the front porch, cheeks pink from the cold, the mountains hazy behind them. For a while, when I drove past on my way to other showings, I would see their kitchen light on, the shape of someone moving behind the curtains. 6 months later, the house defaulted again. This time, there were no personal items, no cereal, no towels on the racks. The basement boxes were gone. The thank you card's photo was sitting on the kitchen counter, face down. Underneath it was a bank notice, unopened, and a letter with a return address I did not recognize. I opened it. The handwriting inside was small and careful. "We thought we were alone here," it said. "We are not. The walls remember other people. They are not echoes. Please do not send anyone else." The signature was just a first name. It did not match either of theirs. I brought that letter to the bank. They shrugged. "People leave weird notes when they are stressed," the manager said. "It happens." He did not make eye contact when he said it. By the time the third buyers appeared, I had started to notice a pattern in the files. All of the prior owners, going back 3 years, had been represented by the same advisory firm, an out-of-town LLC that handled cash purchases. Different couples, different stories, same facilitator. Whenever I tried to call their office, the receptionist would insist she was new, that the previous manager had moved on, that she did not have access to older client records. The third couple was younger, with bright ideas about starting a home business, something artisanal. They signed, they smiled, they moved in. I watched from my car as they carried plants and framed art up the front steps, bringing color back into the house's blank spaces. 2 months later, I drove past on a Tuesday morning and saw the curtains drawn in every window. A week after that, I noticed the snow in the yard was undisturbed, smooth and unbroken from porch to street. The town is small. Absences echo. People asked me in the grocery store if I knew whether the new folks were all right. I said I would check. When I went back with my key, the front door was locked from the inside. I could have called the sheriff. I did not. Instead, I went around back to the basement bulkhead and used the old metal handle there. It stuck, then gave, the hinges complaining. The basement smelled like cardboard and cold concrete. My flashlight beam slid across the usual clutter. Paint cans, an old washer, a workbench with tools hung in careful rows. Against one wall, stacked 3 high, were boxes I recognized. The same labels, the same dates. They had not been removed after the second default. They had been moved. I opened one. Inside were dishes from the first family, a chipped blue bowl, a plastic sippy cup. Another held the retired couple's Afghans, their pattern unmistakable. A third box was full of photographs in mismatched frames, all turned face down the way the card had been. On the back of one, in marker, someone had written, "Do not show them." Along the foundation wall, scratched into the concrete in overlapping lines, were tally marks and names. Some I recognized from the deeds. Some I did not. They were not all from the last 3 years. Some were dated a decade ago. 2 decades. My eyes followed the columns until they reached the most recent set, still dusted with crumbled cement. Underneath the last name, in fresher strokes, were 4 more letters. Stay. The sound of footsteps above me froze my spine. Slow, measured, the weight of a single person crossing the living room. A pause over the basement door. The knob did not turn. After a moment, the footsteps moved away into what I knew was the smallest bedroom, the one that had been empty except for a mattress leaning against the wall when I first saw the house. I did not call out. I backed toward the bulkhead, my light shaking, the boxes and their silent occupants watching me leave. The bank took the house back again. The advisory firm sent an email thanking us for facilitating another smooth transition. I deleted it without replying. The listing is still in my system, technically active. The property has an ID code, a set price, a boilerplate description. On paper, it is no different from a dozen other foreclosures. I have not shown it to anyone since. Sometimes, late at night, I log in and pull up the file. I stare at the digital photo of the front exterior, the blank windows, the snow-clean roofline. I think about the letter on the counter, the boxes in the basement, the names on the wall. I think about the footsteps above me and how whoever made them never came to the door. There is a sentence on our state's property disclosure form that I use to skim past every time. To the best of the seller's knowledge, are there any conditions which might materially affect the safety or desirability of the property? You check yes or no. You explain if you must. If I were honest, truly honest, I would have to add a new line in that blank space. This house does not let people leave the way they think they are leaving. It files them away. My name is Lewis, and in my town the sirens used to mean something simple: fire, storm, or someone hurt bad enough that we dropped everything and ran. I signed up as a volunteer EMT because that is what you do in a place where the nearest full hospital is a helicopter ride away, and the highway might as well be a border between worlds when the snow comes in. There are 6 of us on the roster, most with other jobs, teachers, mechanics, a grocery clerk, and one small fire hall with a radio tower older than I am. When the siren goes, you go. That is the rule. For years, the pattern never changed. One long, rising wail for fire, short blasts for medical, a steady howl if it was a search and rescue call, usually for hunters overdue or tourists who thought micro spikes were optional. The tones came from dispatch at the state trooper post 30 miles away, bounced through our tower and rolled over town like a physical thing. It woke babies, emptied bars, and sent us scrambling into boots and jackets before most people had even sat up in bed. The first time the sirens went off with no call behind them, I was on my couch halfway through a lukewarm microwave dinner. It was 3:17 a.m. My pager was on the coffee table, charger light glowing. 1 second the house was quiet except for the low murmur of some documentary I was not really watching. The next, the siren tore through the night so hard my windows rattled. I was out the door before my brain fully caught up. Muscle memory. Pants, coat, keys, out. The streets were empty. No porch lights flicking on, no other cars pulling out of driveways. When I pulled into the hall, the bay doors were still down and dark. The engine sat where it always sat. The ambulance, which I had backed in myself earlier that evening, had not moved. Inside, the radio console was lit but silent. No tone out, no dispatcher's voice. The big metal toggle that controls the siren was in the off position. One by one, the others drifted in, hair sticking up, faces creased with pillow lines and confusion. Our captain, an older guy named Mike who had been with the department since before I was born, opened the console and checked the wiring like maybe a mouse had shut us down. Faulty relay, someone suggested. Could be a short, another said. Old building, old gear. We waited for dispatch to call and ask why we had not responded. The call never came. When we radioed them, half embarrassed, they sounded annoyed. We did not tone you, the dispatcher said. Must be a local problem. We logged it as a false alarm and went home. Everyone shrugged it off in that particular way people do when they do not want to think too hard about an unexplained noise in the dark. 3 nights later, at exactly 3:17 a.m., it happened again. Same shriek, same rattling windows, same dead quiet console when we reached the hall. This time, 2 people in town were already awake and waiting for us. An older woman who lived alone near the river and a teenager from the apartment building above the laundromat. Both of them had walked outside in their pajamas, barefoot in the snow, drawn out of their houses without coats, without keys. I heard my name, the older woman kept saying, arms wrapped around herself, lips blue. In the siren, plain as day, like someone yelling for me to get up. The teenager looked embarrassed. He had his headphones still around his neck. I thought it was my mom, he muttered, eyes fixed on the pavement. She is back in Anchorage, but it sounded like her, telling me to come outside. We chalked it up to sleep confusion, to the way a sudden noise can blend with whatever your brain is cooking up in dreams. The department put in a request for a tower inspection. The county electrician came out with a toolbox, shook his head at the tangle of wiring, and installed a new relay with a promise that this would take care of the ghost calls. The next week, the siren went off again at 3:17. The new relay was fine. This time, more people were outside. I found Mr. Halper, who needed oxygen at night, standing in the street without his nasal cannula. Shirt open, eyes glassy. A young mother stood on her porch with her baby in her arms and no blanket on either of them, both staring toward the fire hall like they expected to see something coming down the road. Our town librarian, who lived above the old bank, had walked all the way down the block in slippers, hands out a little like she was feeling her way through a dark room. Every one of them said the same thing. They heard someone they trusted calling their name inside the siren. We brought them blankets, got them back inside, checked vitals. No one was hypothermic yet, but it would not have taken much longer. When I drove back to the hall with the ambulance 3:30 glowing on the dash clock, the siren had wound down to silence. The panel light blinked steady green. No alarms, no fault indicators. The radio continued to insist there had been no page. The recordings were what finally convinced me this was not just a glitch. We keep an old digital recorder wired into the console, a holdover from a grant project that was supposed to help us review response times. After the 4th false tone, I dug through the files and played back the last several nights. Regular calls sounded like they always had. The quick burst of the station's tones, the dispatcher's clipped voice, the siren kicking in. On the false nights, the audio was different. It started with static, low and humming. Then, a few seconds before the siren itself began, there was a sound buried in the noise, so faint I had to put on headphones to catch it. Not language exactly, more like a chorus of overlapping voices, all at the same pitch, rising and falling in a pattern that almost sounded like words. If I slowed the track down, the pattern stretched and I could pick out syllables, fragments of names, the cadence of questions. On the most recent file, when I listened alone in my kitchen with the volume high, I heard my own name. It was not my voice, but it was the way people said it on the radio. The slight hesitation, the accent we all share up here, the way the S blurred at the end. It called twice, then merged back into the rising wail of the siren. I told myself I was priming, that after hearing enough scared residents describe the same experience, I was bound to find patterns where there were none. I closed the laptop. I walked outside to clear my head. The town looked normal in the thin winter sunlight. Kids trudged to school. Plows scraped side streets. A dog barked at nothing in particular. The fire hall sat at the end of Main like it always had, red bay doors closed, tower reaching up into a sky that held no sign of storms. Here is the part I cannot explain. I pulled into the lot to drop off some paperwork. As I got out of my truck, I heard the siren begin to wind up, not from the tower but from my pager on the seat. It was vibrating, the little screen lit, but the display did not show a call. Just the time, 3:17 p.m., not a.m. this time. Broad daylight. The sound was wrong, too compressed, like it had been squeezed into a space too small. Underneath it, layered so faintly I almost missed it, I heard the echo of a voice I remembered from years ago, in another emergency on another stretch of highway. A young woman we had reached too late, whose last words had been a plea to call her father. I knew that voice. I had heard it once, and it had lived in the back of my skull ever since. Now it was saying my name. I threw the pager onto the passenger floor and stepped back. The tone cut off mid-wail. The screen went dark. When I brought it inside, the console showed no recent activations. Dispatch once again insisted they had not toned us. Since that day, the timing has gotten less predictable. Sometimes it is still 3:17 a.m., that cold hinge between night and morning. Sometimes it is mid-afternoon, catching people as they fold laundry or stand at their sinks. Every time, at least one person in town walks outside without a coat, without shoes, eyes fixed on the tower. We have replaced every piece of equipment we can afford to replace. New relay, new control board, even a newer siren unit donated from a larger department down the highway. The sound is cleaner now, higher pitched, more modern. It does not matter. The pattern continues. No logged tones, no power spikes, no rational source. Some nights I lie in bed, pager on the nightstand, and listen to the quiet waiting. When the siren starts, I can almost feel a decision being made somewhere beyond the edges of our grid. As if something learned, the night of a particular call years ago, that this town will open its doors and step outside whenever it hears that shape of sound. As if the frequency is less an alarm now and more an invitation. People ask why I do not move. It would be easy enough. I could find a job in a bigger town, a department with proper staffing and newer gear that does not seem to wake up on its own. My answer is always something practical about money, about family, about obligations. The truth is, I am afraid that wherever I go, if I hear a siren in the distance, any siren, I will recognize what is underneath it, not the hardware, not the dispatcher. Something else, using the language of emergencies to call specific names out into the cold. And once you have heard your own name in that sound, it is hard to convince yourself it was only the wind. My name is Ruby, and I still wake up some nights with the taste of salt in my mouth, even though I now live 300 miles from the nearest ocean. For 3 winters, I worked nights at a fish cannery in a small Alaskan harbor town you would miss if you blinked on the ferry. The place sat in a shallow bowl of land, one road in, one road out, and a shoreline that curved like a cupped hand around black water. My shift ran from 6 p.m. to 3 a.m. The work was loud and bright and wet, metal tables and conveyor belts and the constant hiss of hoses. When we clocked out, the silence outside always felt wrong at first, like someone had turned the world off. I started walking the shoreline after my shift to clear my head. It was not a beach, not really. Just a narrow strip of packed snow and frozen gravel between the last houses and where the ice began to form a ragged fringe on the water. The harbor lights cast a weak yellow glow over the first few yards. Beyond that, it was just the moon, the stars, and the slow grinding sound of ice floes nudging each other in the dark. The first time I noticed it, I thought I was just overtired. I was halfway along my usual route, boots creaking in the cold, breath fogging in front of me. The wind came off the water in sharp little knives, bringing with it the smell of brine and diesel and something older, deeper. I had my hands jammed into my pockets and my shoulders up around my ears when I heard a low, wet scrape from the inlet. Something moved out there, just beyond the brittle edge of shore ice. At first, it was only the suggestion of a shape, darker than the water around it, keeping pace with me. When I stopped, it stopped. When I took 3 more steps, it slid forward the same distance with a soft, sucking sound, like a wet cloth being dragged over stone. I told myself it was a chunk of loose ice caught in a current. The harbor is full of those in winter, blocks that bump and turn and drift wherever the water nudges them. But this one did not turn. It did not bump into anything. It stayed parallel to the shoreline, matching my speed with an ease that made my skin crawl. I tested it. I walked faster. It did too. I cut in closer to the houses. It adjusted, hugging the line where the ice thinned. At one point, I turned and walked back the way I had come. There was a pause, as if I had surprised it. Then the shape reversed direction and fell in beside me again. When I finally forced myself to leave the shoreline and cut up toward my apartment, I could still see it from the corner of my eye, hovering at the edge of the ice, as far in as the water would let it, like a dog pressed against an invisible fence. The next night, I told myself I would not look. I walked the same route, eyes fixed on my own boots, counting steps, trying to think about anything else. It did not matter. I could feel it, a pressure out on the water, the way you can tell when someone is staring at the back of your neck. On the 3rd night, I gave in and turned my head. It was closer, not enough to see clearly. Just a suggestion of bulk rising slightly above the waterline, darker than the sky. No ripple spread from it. No steam rose where it touched the ice, even though anything living should have thrown off some kind of heat in that air. What caught my attention most was not its shape, but the line of shallow impressions leading from the water up to the rocks below the seawall, filled in by fresh snow. I had not seen those the night before. My co-workers had their own names for the thing on the shoreline. They laughed when they said them at first. Every coastal town collects stories, things glimpsed from boats at dusk, shapes between the pilings, eyes reflecting firelight from places no animal should be. Old-timers at the bar talked about the one that walks the tide line, in the same tone they used for winter storms, annoyance mixed with respect. "It picks a person each season," one of the older women told me, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee at 3 in the morning. "Follows them until the ice breaks up, then it finds someone new." "How do you know who it has picked?" I asked. She stared into her mug. "You will know." I stopped walking the shoreline alone after that. I told myself I was being paranoid. I made myself other excuses, too tired, too cold, not worth the frostbite. Still, some nights from my upstairs window I would see a darker patch moving along the edge of the harbor, tracing the path I used to take. The night it came onto land, the power went out. A storm had been brewing all day, low clouds stacking over the bay like layers of wool. By midnight, the wind had ramped up enough to make the cannery building shudder. We shut down the line early. When I stepped outside, snow was already blowing sideways, turning the town into a tunnel of white. I hugged the buildings as I walked home, head down, letting muscle memory guide my feet. The lights died when I was halfway there. Not a flicker, not a brownout. 1 second, the street lamps and harbor beacons were haloing the storm. The next, everything dropped into a darkness so complete I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. The silence that followed was almost worse than the dark. The wind did not stop, but its sound dulled, like someone had put a lid over the town. No generator kicked in. No porch lights flared. I stood, boots planted, and realized how far I was from any door I could call mine. Behind me, from the direction of the shoreline, came the sound of something heavy setting its weight down on frozen ground. It was not a footstep, not exactly. More like a series of points touching down in sequence, pressing through the surface crust. Snow shifted, ice crystals squealed, the hair on my arms lifted under layers of wool. I did not turn at first. Some animal part of me believed fiercely that if I did not look, it would not look back. I started walking, again, faster now, toward the faint square of a window I knew belonged to my building. The sounds followed, not in perfect time, not that eerie, synchronized pace from the water, but with the irregular rhythm of something adjusting to new terrain. I could hear it moving between the last line of houses and the seawall, pacing me, always just beyond the edge of my vision. When I cut behind a shed to take a shortcut, there was a pause, then the crunch of snow as it recalibrated and slid to intercept. For one small stretch, the path forced me to walk with my back to the harbor, completely exposed. I felt it then, directly behind me, close enough that the air on my neck warmed by a fraction. The smell hit me. Brine, rotting kelp, and something coppery like blood that had been left in a metal bucket too long. I broke and ran. My boots slipped on hidden ice. I slammed my shoulder into a fence post, bounced, kept going. Behind me, the sounds did not speed up. They stayed steady, deliberate. Whatever it was did not need to rush. I reached my building's back door and fumbled with the keys, hands shaking. The metal was so cold it burned. I could feel weight just beyond the circle of my fear, settling, watching. When I finally jerked the door open and stumbled inside, I could not stop myself. I turned. There was nothing there, just a wall of swirling snow, the faint outline of the seawall, and the black line of the harbor beyond. For a second, I thought I had imagined all of it, that stress and stories had chewed holes in my sense of reality. Then I looked down. Soaked prints led from the direction of the shoreline up to the bare patch of concrete just outside my door. They were not human, not exactly, not paws either. Each mark was an elongated oval with deep indentations at one end, as if something like fingers had dug in for purchase. The spacing suggested something tall, something that would have had to duck to fit under the doorframe. There were no prints leading away. I did not sleep that day. The power came back with the first weak light of morning. By noon, the storm had moved on, leaving the town looking scrubbed and bright and harmless. The prints had filled in with new snow. If I had not seen them, no one would have believed they had ever been there. I lasted 2 more months before I transferred inland to a warehouse job that smelled of dust instead of fish. I told my boss I wanted to be closer to family. I told my friends I was tired of the cold, all true in their way. What I do not tell people is that on my last night in town, as I loaded the last of my boxes into the back of a borrowed truck, I found a line of wet marks on my apartment floor leading from the balcony door to the side of my bed. Just a faint trail, already drying as if something had come in out of habit, realized I was leaving and gone again. I locked that door even though I knew locks would not matter to something that moved freely between water and land. Now in a city where the loudest thing at night is traffic and the only water I see is a river tamed by concrete, I sometimes wake from a dead sleep convinced that if I open my curtains I will see a darker shape moving along some new shoreline, tracing a new path. Because if it really does pick a person each season, and if I really was the one it chose for those 3 winters, then leaving town may not have ended whatever passed between us. It might have only changed where the tide comes in. My name is Oliver, and the first time I saw my own name attached to a town I had never visited, I thought it was a software glitch. Right after college, I took a contract job doing population surveys for a federal agency. It was not glamorous, but it paid well enough and got me out into parts of Alaska most people only ever see as green smears on a weather map. My job sounded simple on paper. Fly into small towns, confirm how many people actually lived there, what kind of housing they had, and whether the numbers on the government spreadsheets matched the reality on the ground. They almost never did. Each field worker got a rugged tablet preloaded with maps, addresses, and a list of residents by name and date of birth. We were told the data came from multiple verified sources: tax records, school rosters, voter rolls. My job was to knock on doors, ask a set of scripted questions, and tap the answers into boxes. If someone had moved or died, I was supposed to mark it and explain. The first town in my story sat on the edge of a river that looked too big for the number of buildings beside it. Maybe 120 houses, most of them weathered and leaning. A school, a clinic, a store that doubled as a gossip hub. The tablet said the population was 402. The locals laughed when I mentioned that. 300 maybe, the store owner said, counting on his fingers. If you include the dogs. Still, the list on my screen did not care about jokes. It cared about checkboxes. I started at one end of town and worked my way through house by house. Most people were cooperative, some suspicious, a few openly hostile in that way people get when the government shows up asking questions. The pattern that bothered me did not show up until the second week. There were 3 houses near the edge of town, marked on the map as occupied. The names attached to them were unfamiliar to the locals. When I knocked, no one answered. Through the windows, I saw furniture draped in sheets, dust on counters, the pale outlines on walls where picture frames had once hung. Abandoned by every sign that matters. Those places, the school principal said when I asked. Families left years ago, gradually. One went to Anchorage, one down to Oregon, one... I do not remember, nobody's been in there since. Why, they still on your list? I showed her the tablet. 3 names, 3 birth dates, all marked present, temporarily away. Last contact 6 months ago. She frowned. That is wrong, she said. We did the school census last fall. They did not have kids, they did not have anything. Empty. I flagged the entries as moved or an unknown destination and added notes, the way we were trained. At the end of each day, the tablet synced via satellite, sending my updates into whatever databases churned behind the scenes. I expected to see those 3 houses marked differently the next morning. They were not. In fact, a new field had appeared under each name. Recent activity confirmed. Employment code. Health service indicator. School enrollment flag. There were no jobs in that town that matched those codes. No clinics that used that health system. The school principal confirmed for me twice that no new children had enrolled under those last names. Could be a mix-up with another town, my supervisor said over the satellite phone when I called from my motel. The system aggregates from multiple sources, just collect what you see. So I did. I marked more people as moved away or deceased than my tablet seemed comfortable with. Every time I synced, the numbers on the home screen resisted dropping below a certain threshold. It was subtle. A family I had marked gone would reappear 2 streets over, assigned to a dilapidated trailer no one had occupied in years. An elderly man I had personally interviewed would show up 3 lines down with a slightly altered date of birth and a different middle initial. At first I thought it was my error. Fat fingers on a touchscreen, long days, jet lag. Then I started taking my own notes in a paper notebook, separate from the tablet. Names, ages, faces, cross-checking at night. The discrepancies were not mine. In the next village, a fly-in place even smaller and more remote, I noticed something worse. A name from the previous town, same spelling, same birthday, showed up in the roster as a teacher at the tiny school. The principal introduced her to me as the new hire from downriver. She was in her 30s, hair pulled back, hands ink-stained from grading. Familiar in a way I could not immediately place. It was only later, back in my motel room, that I realized why. I had seen her face before in a faded missing persons flyer taped to the wall of the first town store. Same jawline, same dimple at the corner of her mouth, different name under the photo. The tablet did not care. On its screen, she was the person the system said she was now. The old name had been smoothed away, moved somewhere else, or dropped entirely. When I brought it up with my supervisor, he sounded tired. "Look," he said, "at this scale, there will always be anomalies. People lying, people changing names, clerical errors. The important thing is that the total population stays within our projections. That is how funding, supply chains, all that gets allocated. We cannot have big drops. It spooks the folks who control the money." "But that is the point," I said. "These towns are losing people, they are shrinking. Shouldn't that be reflected?" He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had a slightly different edge. "Off the record," he said, "there is a thing they do called smoothing. If a place dips below a certain line, the algorithm borrows from other data sets. Temporary workers, seasonal residents, even theoretical returnees. It is not supposed to touch individual identities, just head counts. Maybe it is overshooting." "Borrowing from where?" I asked. "From where the system thinks they could be," he said. "Do your job, Oliver. Knock on the doors you can knock on. Let the numbers be the numbers." I finished the contract. I told myself I would file a report later, maybe talk to a journalist, someone who cared about statistical ethics and rural neglect. Life, as it does, got in the way. I took another job in a city far to the south, learned to sleep without the sound of single-engine planes buzzing overhead. I would have forgotten most of it, filed it under strange things about a strange year, if not for what I saw last winter. I was visiting family, killing time in an airport between connections, when I noticed a screen mounted near the gate. It was cycling through information about rural health initiatives. Maps with dots, color-coded charts, a scrolling list of underserved communities. On one slide, there was a table of sample records, anonymized, the kind of thing agencies use to show how their data helps real people. My eyes snagged on a line in the middle. Town, redacted. Population 387. Occupation, general store clerk. Housing, single-room apartment above post office. Name, O. Grant. Age, 29. It was not my full name. The age was off by a year. But the description matched exactly where I had lived during that contract. Someone who did not know me could have dismissed it as coincidence. Then I saw the ID code in the corner, a long string of letters and numbers I recognized from my old login credentials. The system still had me logged somewhere as an active resident of a town I had left years ago, working a job I had never had. When I got home, shaken, I dug my field notebook out of a box in the back of my closet. The 3 names from those empty houses were on the first page, underlined. Out of morbid curiosity, I typed one into a public search portal we had used for cross-checking records. It popped up immediately. Same date of birth. now listed as a janitor at a school in a different village. The address field contained a post office box number and a street that did not exist on any map I could find. I searched the other two. One had become a seasonal fisheries worker in a coastal town. The third was marked simply as relocated with a code that, when I traced it through a tangle of agency documentation, translated loosely to location data approximated. Approximated, as if a person could be rounded like a decimal. I have not gone back north since. I tell people it is because of the cold, or because flights are too expensive, or because my work does not require it. All true, none the whole truth. The real reason is this. Somewhere in those databases there is a version of me still living in a town by a river, counted on forms used to justify budgets and supplies. If I returned even as a visitor, I am afraid some part of the system would recognize a discrepancy and correct it. Numbers, after all, are not meant to move backward. Once they have you down as belonging to a place, they do not like to let you go. And if a spreadsheet insists that you are still walking the same snowy streets you left years ago, buying groceries at a store whose owner remembers your face, who is to say it is wrong? The people in those towns are too busy keeping the heat on to argue with a screen. The ones who leave have other problems. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night with the vivid sense that I have just come back from somewhere very cold, that my boots are still wet, that a door I did not mean to knock on has just closed behind me. In those moments, half asleep, I can hear a voice in my head, flat and automated and full of authority, repeating a single phrase. Record updated. Resident confirmed. I do not know anymore whether it is talking about who I am now or who I am there. My name is Freya, and according to the records at the harbor office in Ketchikan Sound, I died 5 years ago on a night when no ferries were running. I worked as a line cook at a dockside bar where the floor was always a little sticky and the regulars could tell the time by which fishing boat was coming in. The bar's back door opened almost directly onto the ferry terminal. On slow nights, I would prop it open and watch people hurry down the gangways with backpacks and duffel bags. The kind of transient traffic that made the town feel bigger than it was. The first time I heard the story of the last ferry, it was from an old deckhand named Lewis who smelled like diesel and coffee. He said there was a boat that only came in on the worst nights, when the wind made the halyards scream and the whole town tasted like metal. It never showed up on the schedule, never on the harbor master's board. It docked just long enough to take on whoever would step aboard and then slipped out into fog so thick you could not see your own knuckles. People come back from it, he said, staring into his beer, but they do not come back right. He would not elaborate no matter how many shots the bartender slid his way. I filed it with the other local legends. Lights in the forest no one wanted to follow, a drowned boy who knocked on cabin doors during snowstorms. Then the storm came. It started as rain, the way it always does there, steady and gray. By mid-afternoon, the drops got bigger, heavier, and the wind picked up. The harbor took on that low, restless chop that makes even big vessels look nervous. By the time my shift started at 6, the weather radio was a constant background voice listing warnings. Gale force winds, visibility near zero, all small craft advised to stay in port. Around 8, the official ferries stopped. One by one, their status on the board switched to delayed, then canceled. A few soaked travelers straggled into the bar, trailing their luggage, eyes wide with that particular stranded look. We stayed open because the boss said storms were good for business. It was close to midnight when the power flickered. The lights strobed, then steadied. Out the back door, the terminal lamps looked smeared, halos stretched sideways by the rain. I stepped outside to dump a bucket of mop water and felt the wind try to take the door out of my hand. That was when I saw it. A ferry easing into the slip like the storm was nothing. No announcement, No horn blast. 1 second the dock was empty. The next there was a boat where there had not been one. Not one of the usual fleet either. Those I knew by heart, the scratches on their hulls, the paint jobs, the names. This one was smaller, squatter, painted a dull white that had gone almost gray with age. No logo on the side, no name that I could see from where I stood. Its deck lights burned a flat, steady yellow that did not flicker in the wind. The gangway came down with a clang I felt through my boots. A few figures moved on deck, their movements smooth and economical, hands on ropes, jackets zipped to their chins. From the angle I could not make out their faces, only the pallor where skin showed. Behind me the back door swung wider. One of the stranded travelers, guy in his 20s with a stuffed backpack, stepped out, saw the boat and let out a sigh of raw relief. "They got something running after all," he said. "Thought I was stuck here." Before I could say that the board had shown all routes canceled, he was already jogging toward the terminal, head down against the weather. 2 more followed, then a third, drawn as much by his certainty as by the promise of getting out. I told myself it had to be a charter, some special run the harbor master had not bothered to mention over the radio. Still, something in me resisted the idea of stepping any closer. I went back inside, closed the door, and tried to focus on my orders. Maybe 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. A text from my cousin Mia, who I had not heard from in months. "Heard there's a storm down there." "You okay?" I smiled, thumb working automatically. "Yeah, I'm fine. Ferry's still running somehow." The 3 dots blinked, then her reply came through. "Freya, the ferry shut down at 9, just saw the alert. Go home." The bar quieted earlier than usual. Around 1, the boss said we could close. The wind had shifted, now coming in hard from the open water, driving sheets of rain sideways. The terminal board was dark when I stepped outside. The slip where I had seen the boat was empty. No lights, no motion, just the slap of water against pilings. The walk to my apartment was only 6 blocks, but the storm made it feel like miles. Twice I had to brace myself against buildings when gusts shoved hard enough to steal my breath. At the second intersection, a truck slowed beside me, the driver leaning over to crank down the passenger window. "Ferry is running late," he called. "You headed out? They are holding it for last boarding." He jerked his chin toward the terminal. Over his shoulder in the rear window, I saw the reflection of the dock, the glow of deck lights, a gangway extended, figures waiting. "I am not traveling," I shouted back. "I live here." He looked puzzled for a second, like that answer did not quite fit whatever he had been told. Then he nodded, rolled the window up, and drove on. Curiosity, they say, is what kills cats and gets humans onto boats they should ignore. I should have kept walking. Instead, I turned toward the terminal. From that angle, the ferry was undeniably there. The same squat silhouette, the same 2 steady lights. The overhead speakers, which usually crackled with announcements, were silent. No one stood at the ticket booth. The doors to the waiting room were locked, chairs empty inside. On the gangway, a handful of passengers clustered, hoods up. As I got closer, my heart jolted. I knew those faces, not personally, but from flyers pinned to corkboards around town and in nearby ports. A woman who had gone missing on a hike 3 summers ago. A man whose kayak had been found adrift, empty, near the mouth of the Sound. A pair of siblings last seen hitchhiking north on the highway. Their clothes were wrong for the weather, light jackets, faded shirts, but they did not seem cold. They watched the open part of the dock, not the storm. One of the deckhands turned toward me. He was young, maybe my age, with a cap pulled low over his brow. His eyes met mine, and something in my chest stuttered. He had my cousin's jawline, my cousin's slightly crooked nose, but his expression was blankly professional, the way ferry crew look when they are scanning for last-minute passengers. "Last boarding?" he said. His voice was perfectly audible over the wind, as if the air itself carried it cleanly. "I am not on the schedule," I said, though I had taken enough last-minute trips to know that hardly mattered. "And they said there were no runs tonight." His gaze flicked to a clipboard in his hand. The page was covered in names, some neatly typed, some added in pen. He ran a finger down the list, stopped and tapped. "You are on it," he said. "You were always on it." I stepped closer despite myself. The rain hit my face in needles. The wind tugged at my hood. On the page, near the middle, my name sat, spelled correctly, birth date accurate. Next to it, in a column I could not quite read, there was a notation. Return. I am not a brave person by nature. I get anxious crossing busy streets, flinch at sudden noises. But something in me flared hot at that word. "I am not going," I said. "That is wrong. I live here. I am not supposed to be on any list." The passengers on the gangway turned their heads one by one like sunflowers tracking light. Their eyes were not empty exactly. They looked resigned, like people at the end of a long day who have finally reached their bus stop. Behind them, deeper on deck, I caught sight of a wall plastered with papers. Not safety notices or route maps, photographs. Grainy shots of small towns, harbor fronts, gas stations, houses at the ends of lonely roads. Under each, in cramped handwriting, were names. Some were crossed out, a few were circled. On the far right edge of the board, a cluster of images showed my town. The dockside bar, my apartment building, the grocery store where I bought my food. Under one of those, my name was written. Not return this time. Taken. The deckhand followed my gaze, then looked back at me. "We can do this the easy way," he said, as if offering a menu choice. "Or you can go back and pretend for a while." A gust hit hard enough to make the gangway flex. The passengers did not sway. The boat did not rock. For a heartbeat, there was a strange stillness at its center, like a calm eye in the storm. I stepped back. "Then I choose to pretend," I said. My voice shook, but the words came out clear. "I am not getting on that boat." His face did not change. He made a mark on the clipboard I could not see. Behind him, the photographs rustled, though there was no breeze on deck. "Suit yourself," he said. "We always come back." I turned and walked away, forcing myself not to run, not to glance over my shoulder. By the time I reached the corner and could not help it, the terminal was empty again. No boat, no lights, just rain shivering in the floodlamps and the dark line of the far shore. The next morning, I went to the harbor office to file a complaint, a report, something. The clerk behind the glass looked up my name, frowned, and then went very still. "According to this," she said slowly, "you were marked as a no-show on an outbound ferry 5 years ago, later updated to lost at sea, presumed deceased." She turned the screen toward me. There was my name, my date of birth, and a note referencing a storm very much like the one from the night before. "I live here," I said, hearing the edge of hysteria in my voice. "You rent this apartment to me." I slid my ID under the glass. "I have worked at the bar for 3 years. You know me." Her gaze bounced between the card and the screen, then back to my face. "I do know you," she said finally. "I also know I cannot edit this. It is locked. It says the record is archived." "Archived," I repeated, "like a file." "Like a completed journey," she said softly. I quit the bar a week later and left town once the storm season eased. I told people I was tired of the rain, that I wanted a place with more roads than boats. All of that was true. None of it is the reason I will not step foot on a ferry again. Because if a system that keeps track of who leaves and who arrives has already decided I did not make it to shore, then every time I set foot on a deck I am not traveling somewhere new. I am only correcting an error.